The thunder cracked overhead as Rose O'Malley stared at the raging waters of the Cimarron River, her heart pounding with the desperate certainty that she had to cross tonight no matter the cost. The year was 1875, and in the wild territories of the American West, a woman alone faced dangers that multiplied with every passing hour. Rose clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, the cool May air biting through her damp clothes. The rain had finally stopped, but the storm had transformed the usually placid river into a churning monster. She'd been traveling for weeks, fleeing from a past that threatened to swallow her whole, and this river was all that stood between her and the promise of a new life in the Colorado Territory. Just a river, she whispered to herself, trying to gather courage. Just water. A twig snapped behind her, and Rose whirled around, her hand automatically reaching for the small Derringer pistol hidden in the folds of her skirt. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, and the silver moonlight revealed a man in a worn duster and a wide-brimmed hat. A cowboy by the looks of him, with a weathered face that had seen its share of hardship. "Madam," he called out, his voice deep and steady, "you don't want to be trying that crossing tonight." "I have no choice," Rose replied, her chin lifting with determination. "I need to be in Silverton by week's end." The cowboy stepped closer, and Rose could now make out his features' strong jawline, dark eyes that reflected the moonlight, and a hint of concern etched across his face. "Name's Isaac Whitman," he said, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. "And with all due respect, madam, that river's taken men twice your size. The spring melts made it treacherous." "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Whitman, but my business can't wait," Rose said, turning back toward the water. She took one step forward, then another, the cold mud sucking at her boots. The water lapped hungrily at the shoreline, swirling with unseen currents. "Wait," Isaac called, striding forward. "At least let me help you find a safer crossing point." Rose hesitated, torn between her instinct to trust no one and the obvious danger before her. Before she could decide, a distant howl echoed through the tree's wolves, and not too far off. "Those wolves have been tracking something for the past hour," Isaac said quietly. "Might be they're tracking you." Rose glanced back at the shadowy tree line, then at the fearsome river. Neither option seemed promising. "There's a place about half a mile downstream," Isaac continued, "where the river widens. It's shallower there. I was heading that way myself." Rose studied him for a moment. His eyes held no malice that she could discern, and the wolves called again, closer this time. "Lead on, Mr. Whitman," she finally agreed. They walked in silence along the riverbank, the ground slick with mud. Rose stumbled once, and Isaac's hand shot out to steady her, warm and strong against her arm. She pulled away quickly, unused to such contact. "What brings you out here alone, miss?" Isaac let the question hang between them. "O'Malley. Rose O'Malley," she answered reluctantly. "And my reasons are my own." Isaac nodded, respecting her privacy. "Fair enough. These parts aren't kind to lone travelers, especially after dark." They reached a bend in the river where, as promised, the water spread out in a wider channel. But to Rose's dismay, even here the current was swift, white foam capping the surface in the moonlight. "Still looks dangerous," she observed. "It is," Isaac agreed. "But I know this crossing. There's a line of stones beneath the surface, a natural ford. Follow me exactly and we'll make it across." Rose looked doubtfully at the rushing water. "And if I slip?" "Then I'll catch you," he said simply. Isaac led his horse to the water's edge. The animal seemed skittish, sensing the danger. "Thunder here doesn't like water much," Isaac explained, patting the animal's neck, "but he trusts me." He looked back at Rose. "Can you do the same, Miss O'Malley, for just the next few minutes?" Rose hesitated, then nodded once. Isaac offered his hand, but she shook her head, preferring to keep her independence. "I'll go first," he said, leading Thunder into the shallows. "Step exactly where I step." The water was shockingly cold as Rose followed him in, soaking through her boots instantly. She gasped but kept moving, watching Isaac's feet carefully. The current pushed against her legs, trying to sweep them out from under her. One step, then another, the water rising to her knees, then her thighs. The middle of the river loomed ahead, darker and more threatening. A wolf howl, much closer now, echoed from the bank behind them. Rose glanced back nervously. "Keep moving," Isaac encouraged. "Don't look back." Rose took another step, but her foot slipped on a mossy rock. She lurched forward with a cry, losing her balance. The current caught her instantly, pulling her sideways. In seconds, the water was up to her waist, then her chest, shockingly cold and powerful. "Isaac." She screamed, forgetting formalities as panic seized her. "Hold on," Isaac shouted, securing Thunder's reins to a branch that protruded from the water. Without hesitation, he dove into the rushing current. The water closed over Rose's head, darkness enveloping her as the current tumbled her downstream. She fought to reach the surface, her lungs burning. When she finally broke through, she gulped air, only to be pulled under again. The weight of her sodden skirts dragged her down, and her arms flailed uselessly against the power of the river. Something strong gripped her arm. Isaac. He pulled her against his chest, his powerful strokes cutting through the water. Rose clung to him, fighting to keep her head above the surface. "Kick with me," he shouted over the roar of the water. Toward that fallen tree, Rose saw the massive trunk stretching partway across the river and kicked as hard as she could. Inch by inch, they moved closer to it, until Isaac's hand caught a protruding branch. With tremendous effort, he pulled them both toward the trunk, then heaved Rose up onto it. She collapsed against the rough bark, coughing up river water, her whole body trembling. Isaac hauled himself up beside her, his breathing labored. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with concern. Rose shook her head, unable to speak. Isaac's arm remained around her shoulders, steady and warm despite their drenching. "We need to get you warm," he said, surveying their surroundings. "There's a hunter's cabin not far from here. Think you can walk a little more?" Rose nodded, gathering her strength. When Isaac helped her to her feet, she didn't pull away this time. They made their way back to where Thunder waited, still tethered to the branch in the shallower water. Isaac led both Rose and the horse safely to the opposite shore, then guided them through the darkness to a small, dilapidated cabin nestled among the pines. "It's not much," he said, pushing open the door, "but it's dry." The cabin was indeed humble, a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a narrow cot against the far wall. Isaac quickly set about building a fire while Rose stood dripping and shivering by the door. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," Isaac said matter-of-factly. "I'll step outside while you change." "Into what?" Rose asked, looking down at her sodden dress. Isaac rummaged in his saddlebag and pulled out a flannel shirt and a pair of worn canvas trousers. "These will have to do. They'll be too big, but they're dry." He placed them on the cot, then added a wool blanket. "I'll be just outside." When the door closed behind him, Rose peeled off her dripping dress, petticoats, and corset with fumbling fingers. The cabin was chilly, but the fire was beginning to cast a warm glow. She pulled on Isaac's clothes, rolling up the sleeves and pant legs. They smelled of horses, leather, and something uniquely him not unpleasant. "You can come in," she called when she was decent. Isaac entered, carrying more firewood. He paused when he saw her, his expression softening. "They suit you," he said with a small smile. Rose felt her cheeks warm. "Hardly proper attire for a lady. Proper attire would have drowned you tonight." He added wood to the fire. Hungry, Rose realized she was famished. She hadn't eaten since noon. Isaac produced jerky, hardtack, and a canteen of coffee from his saddlebags. It was a meager meal, but to Rose, it tasted wonderful. They sat before the fire, the crackling flames the only sound besides the occasional drip from their clothes hanging nearby. "So," Isaac finally said, "what's in Silverton that's worth risking your life?" Rose hesitated, studying him in the firelight. His question was direct, but his tone held no judgment. "A fresh start," she answered simply. Isaac nodded. "Running from something or toward something?" "Both, perhaps." Rose gazed into the fire. "I was a schoolteacher in Kansas City. There was an incident. A man of influence took an interest in me. When I rejected his advances, he made sure I lost my position. Isaac's jaw tightened. Some men don't understand the meaning of the word no. This one certainly didn't. Rose wrapped the blanket tighter around herself. When he became more insistent, I decided it was time to leave. My cousin in Silverton wrote that they need teachers there. So you set out alone, Isaac said, not as a question but as a statement tinged with admiration. I had little choice. And you, Mr. Whitman, what brings you to this lonely stretch of river? Isaac leaned back, stretching his long legs toward the fire. I'm a cattle driver, just finished taking a herd up from Texas to the railhead at Dodge City. Heading to my brother's place near Durango now. Family is a blessing, Rose said softly. It is. Isaac studied her face. You have family waiting in Silverton besides your cousin, Rose shook her head. My parents died of fever 5 years ago. I have no siblings. I'm sorry to hear that. The sincerity in his voice touched her. They fell into comfortable silence, the fire popping and hissing as it dried their clothes. Rose felt her eyelids growing heavy, the events of the day catching up with her. Take the cot, Isaac said, noticing her exhaustion. I'll sleep by the fire. Too tired to argue, Rose made her way to the narrow bed. The rough blanket scratched against her skin, but she was too weary to care. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Isaac's profile silhouetted against the dancing flames. Morning arrived with soft golden light filtering through the cabin's single window. Rose woke disoriented, then remembered the events of the night before. She sat up to find Isaac already awake, cooking something that smelled like flapjacks over the fire. Good morning, he said, glancing up. Hope you like hot cakes. They're not fancy, but they're filling. Rose's stomach rumbled in response. She hadn't had a proper breakfast in days. They smell wonderful. They ate in companionable silence, the hot cakes sweet with the last of Isaac's maple sugar. Rose's clothes were still damp in spots, but dry enough to wear. She excused herself outside to change, grateful for the morning sunshine that promised better weather. When she returned to the cabin, Isaac was saddling Thunder. The river's gone down some, he said. We should be able to cross safely at the ford now. Rose felt an unexpected twinge of disappointment that their time together was ending so soon. I suppose we should get an early start. Isaac nodded, though she thought she detected a similar reluctance in his eyes. Which way are you headed after crossing? The main trail to Silverton branches north about 5 miles ahead. Yes, that's my route, Rose confirmed. Well then, Isaac said, adjusting Thunder's saddle, it seems we're traveling the same way at least for a while, if you don't mind the company. Rose found herself smiling. I think after last night, Mr. Whitman, your company would be most welcome. Isaac, he corrected gently. After fishing someone out of a river, it seems surnames are a bit formal. Isaac, Rose agreed, his name feeling comfortable on her lips. They set off together, the morning air crisp and invigorating. Thunder carried their few possessions, while Rose and Isaac walked alongside. The river crossing was much less dramatic in daylight, with the waters having receded considerably. Still, Isaac held Rose's hand firmly as they waded across, and she didn't pull away. The trail wound through meadows bright with spring wildflowers and stands of aspen trees just beginning to leaf out. Rose found herself relaxing in Isaac's company. He was an easy companion, neither too talkative nor too silent, pointing out interesting plants or animal tracks as they walked. By midday, they'd covered a good distance. They stopped in a sunny meadow to rest and share a simple lunch of the remaining jerky and some wild strawberries Isaac had spotted growing along the trail. Were you always a cattle driver? Rose asked as they sat on a fallen log. Isaac shook his head. Started as a ranch hand when I was 14. Worked my way up, fought for the Union in the war when I was barely 18. After that, I drifted for a while, then found work with the cattle drives. It suits me being outdoors, on the move. It sounds like a lonely life, Rose observed. It can be, Isaac admitted. But there's a freedom to it that I've come to value. What about you? Always been a teacher, Rose smiled, remembering. I always wanted to be, Even as a little girl, I'd line up my dolls and pretend to teach them their letters. My father was a bookkeeper. He taught me to read and write and figure sums before I ever set foot in a schoolhouse. You must have been a good teacher, Isaac said. I loved it, Rose said simply. I hope to love it again in Silverton. They continued their journey through the afternoon, the landscape gradually changing as they gained elevation. The plains gave way to foothills, and the distant mountains loomed larger with every mile. As dusk approached, Isaac suggested they make camp near a small stream. We could push on to Bear Creek Station. It's a waypoint for stage coaches, but it's another 2 hours walk. Might be safer to stop now and get an early start tomorrow. Rose agreed, her feet sore from the long day's travel. Isaac proved adept at making camp, quickly gathering firewood and building a small, efficient fire. He unsaddled Thunder and tended to the horse before turning his attention to their evening meal rabbit he'd shot along the trail, roasted over the flames. This is delicious, Rose said appreciatively, the meat tender and flavorful. Trail cooking, Isaac shrugged. You learn to make do. After dinner, they sat beside the fire, the night sounds of the wilderness surrounding them, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the gurgle of the nearby stream. Tell me about your brother, Rose said, curious about the family that awaited Isaac. A fond smile crossed his face. Robert's 4 years older than me, always the responsible one. He worked the ranch while I went off to war, got himself a nice spread near Durango about 5 years back, has a wife, Margaret, and 2 little ones now, a boy and a girl. You're an uncle, Rose observed. I am. Don't get to see them as often as I'd like. The trail keeps me moving. There was a wistfulness in his voice that touched her. Ever thought of settling down yourself? The question slipped out before Rose could consider its propriety. Isaac was quiet for a long moment, poking at the fire with a stick. Thought about it, never seemed to find the right time or the right person. He glanced up at her, then back at the fire. What about you? No suitor left behind in Kansas City? No, Rose said softly. There was someone once. He died at Antietam. I'm sorry, Isaac said, genuine sympathy in his voice. I lost friends there too. It was a long time ago, Rose said. I was barely 17. They fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts as the fire crackled between them. Finally, Isaac spoke again. We should get some rest. I'll take first watch, wake you in a few hours. Watch? Rose questioned. Is that necessary? Probably not, Isaac admitted. But it's habit out here. There are still renegade bands roaming these parts, not to mention wolves, bears, and the occasional mountain lion. Rose's eyes widened. I see. Isaac smiled reassuringly. Don't worry, Thunder will alert us if anything comes near camp. He's better than a guard dog. As if understanding, the horse nickered softly from where he was tethered nearby. Rose settled onto her bedroll, a thin blanket beneath her and Isaac's heavier one on top. Despite the hard ground, she found herself drifting off quickly, lulled by the crackling fire and the quiet presence of the man sitting watch nearby. She woke sometime in the darkest part of night to Isaac gently shaking her shoulder. Your turn, he whispered. Everything's quiet. Rose sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes. What do I do if I see something? Wake me, Isaac said simply, lying down on his own bedroll. But like I said, Thunder will let you know if anything's amiss. Rose sat by the fire, feeding it occasionally as Isaac had shown her. The night was peaceful, stars blazing overhead in a way she'd never seen in the city. She found herself studying Isaac's sleeping form, his features relaxed in slumber. There was something about him, a quiet strength, a decency that drew her. When the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, Rose began preparing coffee, using the last of Isaac's supplies. The rich aroma soon roused him. You let me sleep too long, he said, sitting up. Nothing happened, Rose replied, handing him a cup. It seemed a shame to wake you. Their eyes met over the rim of the tin cup, and something unspoken passed between them, a growing connection neither had anticipated. They broke camp efficiently and continued their journey as the sun rose fully above the horizon. The day promised to be fine, with clear skies and a gentle breeze. By mid-morning they reached the fork in the trail that Isaac had mentioned. Bear Creek Station is about an hour that way, Isaac said, pointing down the western path. It's the last stop before the trail to Durango branches off. Silverton's trail is to the north. Rose felt her heart sink. This was where they would part ways. I suppose this is goodbye then, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Isaac looked down at her, his expression troubled. Rose, I've been thinking. The Silverton Trail gets rough from here. There are places where it hugs cliff edges, others where it crosses high mountain streams. It's no journey for a woman alone. I've managed this far, Rose said, though her protest lacked conviction. You nearly drowned 2 nights ago, Isaac pointed out gently. Rose couldn't argue with that. What do you suggest? Come with me to Bear Creek Station. We can get proper supplies there, maybe hire a guide to take you the rest of the way to Silverton. He hesitated, then added, or you could come with me to Durango. It's a growing town, probably needs teachers as much as Silverton does. Rose was taken aback by the offer. But your brother is expecting you. Robert won't mind the delay, and I'd feel better knowing you arrived safely. There was something in Isaac's eyes that suggested his concern went beyond mere courtesy. Rose hesitated, torn between her original plan and the unexpected alternative before her. Silverton represented the safe choice. Her cousin was there, a teaching position awaited her. But Durango meant more time with Isaac, and the thought stirred something within her she hadn't felt in years. Let's go to Bear Creek Station, she decided. I can send word to my cousin from there, learn more about both options. Relief crossed Isaac's face. A wise choice. They turned west together, the trail now winding more steeply into the foothills. As they walked, Rose found herself wondering what awaited her at Bear Creek Station and beyond. The station proved to be a cluster of rough-hewn buildings surrounding a central courtyard where stagecoaches could turn around. A general store, a stable, a small eatery, and what appeared to be a rudimentary hotel made up the establishment. A few horses were tied at hitching posts, and a stagecoach stood empty beside the stable, its driver nowhere in sight. Not much to look at, Isaac commented, but it's the last bit of civilization before the real mountain trails begin. They headed first to the general store, a bell tinkling as they entered. The proprietor, a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up from his ledger. Afternoon, folks, he greeted them. What can I help you with today? We need supplies, Isaac said. Food for the trail, ammunition for my rifle, and any information you might have about the routes to Silverton and Durango. Both tough trails this time of year, the shopkeeper said, coming around the counter. Spring melt makes the river crossings dangerous. Had a family come through yesterday saying they turned back from the Silverton Trail when they saw how high Thompson Creek was running. Rose and Isaac exchanged glances. Is there a telegraph office here? Rose asked. I need to send word to my cousin in Silverton. No telegraph, madam. But the stage goes through twice a week. Driver can carry a message for you. Next one's due tomorrow morning. While Isaac selected supplies, Rose composed a brief note to her cousin, explaining her delay and possible change of plans. She felt a curious mix of relief and anxiety: relief at postponing a difficult journey, anxiety at the uncertainty of her future. With their business at the store concluded, they crossed to the eatery, a simple establishment with 4 wooden tables and a counter. The aroma of beef stew filled the air, making Rose's stomach growl. Real food, Isaac said with a smile. Been a while. They sat at a corner table, ordered stew and biscuits, and for the first time in days enjoyed a meal they hadn't had to prepare themselves. The stew was hearty, if a bit heavy on the pepper, and the biscuits were fresh baked and flaky. What do you think? Isaac asked as they ate. About Durango, I mean. Rose considered the question. I know very little about it. Is it much different from Silverton? Bigger, Isaac said. More established. Silverton's still mostly a mining camp from what I hear. Rough, Durango's got families, businesses, they're building a school. A proper school, Rose asked, interest kindling in her eyes. So my brother wrote. Said they're looking for someone who can teach reading and figures to the local children. The opportunity sounded promising. And your brother wouldn't mind if I arrived with you? Margaret would be delighted to have another woman around, Isaac assured her. Their place isn't fancy, but it's comfortable. They've got room. Rose sipped her coffee, weighing her options. It does sound appealing, she admitted, but I'd want to be sure there's truly a position for me. I can't impose on your family indefinitely. We can ask around here, Isaac suggested. The stage driver might have news from Durango, and I've got a letter from Robert from about a month back that mentioned the school. After their meal, they inquired about rooms for the night. The small hotel had just 3 rooms, but one was available. Isaac insisted on paying for it. You take the room, he said. I'll bed down in the stable with Thunder. Rose protested, but Isaac was firm. You've been sleeping rough for days. A proper bed will do you good. The room was sparse but clean, a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and bowl, and a small window overlooking the courtyard. After washing away the dust of travel, Rose sat on the edge of the bed, contemplating the turn her journey had taken. 2 days ago, she'd been determined to reach Silverton as quickly as possible. Now she was seriously considering changing her destination entirely, and all because of a chance encounter with a cowboy at a river crossing. You're being impulsive, she told herself. And yet, there was something about Isaac Whitman that inspired trust. He'd saved her life, shown her nothing but respect, and asked for nothing in return. Men like that were rare in her experience. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Rose opened it to find Isaac standing there, his hat in his hands. Pardon the interruption, he said, but the stage just arrived. Driver says the Silverton Trail is indeed washed out in places. They're not expecting it to be passable for at least a week. I see, Rose said, processing this news. And the Durango route, challenging but open. And I've confirmed what I told you, they are indeed looking for a teacher. The driver says the town council posted notices as far as Denver. This news settled something in Rose's mind. Then it seems Durango is the more practical choice. Isaac's eyes brightened. You'll come then? Yes, Rose decided. I'll come to Durango. The smile that spread across Isaac's face warmed something deep inside her. You won't regret it, Rose, I promise you that. That evening, they sat together on the hotel's small porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of orange and gold. The mountain air had grown cool, and Rose wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Cold? Isaac asked, noticing her movement. A little, she admitted. Without hesitation, Isaac shrugged out of his duster and draped it around her shoulders. The garment was warm from his body and carried his scent, leather, horses, and something uniquely him. Better, he asked. Rose nodded, suddenly very aware of his proximity. Thank you. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the sky. Why did you help me that night at the river? Rose asked suddenly. You could have just let me go on my way. Isaac considered the question. Wouldn't have been right, letting you attempt that crossing alone, not when I knew how dangerous it was. But you risked your life, Rose pressed, for a complete stranger. Isaac turned to look at her, his expression serious in the fading light. Some things you just do because they need doing. A person in trouble needs help, you help them. That's how I was raised. The simplicity of his answer touched Rose deeply. In a world where she'd learned to be wary of men's motives, Isaac's straightforward decency was refreshing. Well, she said softly, I'm grateful you were there. Their eyes held for a long moment, and Rose felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the cool evening air. Then Isaac cleared his throat and looked back toward the mountains. We should get an early start tomorrow, he said. It's a 3-day journey to Durango if the weather holds. Rose nodded, oddly disappointed by the return to practicalities. I'll be ready at first light. They parted for the night, Isaac heading to the stable while Rose returned to her room. As she lay in the narrow bed, listening to the night sounds of the small outpost, Rose realized something that both thrilled and frightened her. She was developing feelings for Isaac Whitman. "Don't be foolish," she whispered to herself. "You barely know the man." And yet, she couldn't deny the flutter in her heart when he looked at her, the sense of safety she felt in his presence, the way his smile could brighten even the weariest moment of their journey. Morning arrived with the sound of activity in the courtyard, the stage being prepared for its departure, horses being fed and watered. Rose dressed quickly and packed her few belongings. When she emerged from the hotel, she found Isaac already waiting, Thunder saddled and loaded with their new supplies. "Ready?" he asked, a quiet eagerness in his voice. "Ready," Rose confirmed, handing her letter for her cousin to the stage driver along with a coin for his trouble. They set off just as the sun was clearing the eastern mountains, the trail leading them higher into the rugged terrain. The day was clear and bright, the spring air invigorating as they climbed steadily into the foothills. Isaac seemed to know the trail well, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his previous journeys through these mountains. Rose found herself captivated not just by the tales, but by the man telling them, the animation in his face, the occasional flash of humor, the depth of knowledge about the land and its creatures. By midday, they'd reached a high meadow dotted with blue and yellow wildflowers. They stopped to rest and eat, spreading a blanket on the ground near a clear mountain stream. The view was spectacular, snow-capped peaks in the distance, verdant valleys below. "It's beautiful," Rose said, taking in the panorama. "I've never seen anything like it." "This is why I could never settle in a city," Isaac admitted. "Too closed in. Out here you can see forever." "I understand that now," Rose said, thinking of the cramped streets of Kansas City. After their meal, they continued their journey, the trail now winding through stands of pine and aspen. The afternoon brought them to a steeper section where the path narrowed and hugged the mountainside. Isaac insisted that Rose ride Thunder for this stretch while he led the horse on foot. "I don't want to be a burden," Rose protested. "It's not about that," Isaac said patiently. "This section can be treacherous. Thunder's sure-footed. I'll feel better knowing you're securely mounted." Rose reluctantly agreed, and Isaac helped her into the saddle. His hands at her waist were strong and steady, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. Their eyes met briefly before Isaac turned away to take Thunder's reins. The trail indeed proved challenging, in places barely wide enough for the horse to pass. Rose was grateful for Thunder's calm demeanor and Isaac's confident guidance. At one particularly narrow turn, the path crumbled slightly under Thunder's hoof, sending small stones clattering down the steep slope. "Easy," Isaac murmured to the horse, who steadied instantly at his voice. Rose's heart pounded, but she trusted both man and horse to see her safely through. When they finally reached a wider section, Isaac looked up at her with a reassuring smile. "Worst part's behind us now," he said. "You handled that well." "I didn't do anything," Rose pointed out. "Thunder did all the work." "You stayed calm," Isaac countered. "Many would have panicked, made things worse." His praise warmed her, and Rose found herself smiling back at him. They continued through the afternoon, the trail gradually becoming less precarious as they descended slightly into a sheltered valley. As evening approached, Isaac led them to a protected hollow near another mountain stream, encircled by pines that would block the wind. "We'll camp here tonight," he said, helping Rose dismount. The motion brought them momentarily close, her hands on his shoulders, his at her waist. For a breath they stayed that way, eyes locked, before Isaac stepped back, clearing his throat. "I'll gather firewood." Rose busied herself setting up their small camp, arranging the bedrolls and unpacking food for their evening meal. By the time Isaac returned with armfuls of dry wood, she had everything organized. "You'd make a good trail hand," Isaac commented, impressed by her efficiency. "I'm a quick study," Rose replied with a small smile. The evening passed pleasantly with a meal of beans, bacon, and the corn bread they'd purchased at Bear Creek Station. After they'd eaten, Isaac pulled a small harmonica from his pocket. "Would you mind some music?" he asked almost shyly. "Helps pass the evening hours." "I'd like that very much," Rose said, settling more comfortably by the fire. Isaac began to play, a slow, sweet melody that floated through the mountain air. Rose watched his face as he played, eyes closed, lost in the music. There was a peace about him in that moment that touched something deep within her. When the tune ended, Rose found herself wishing it could continue. "That was beautiful," she said softly. "What is it called?" "Shenandoah," Isaac replied. "Learned it during the war. Reminded me of home when I was far away." "Would you play another?" Rose asked. Isaac nodded, bringing the harmonica back to his lips. This time he played a livelier tune, a dancing melody that made Rose smile. She found her foot tapping in rhythm, and when Isaac opened his eyes and saw her enjoyment, his own expression brightened. Several more songs followed, some familiar to Rose, others new. The music filled the wilderness around them, a human touch in the vast landscape. Finally, Isaac put the harmonica away. "We should turn in. Another long day tomorrow." Rose nodded, though she was reluctant for the evening to end. They prepared for sleep as they had on previous nights, with Isaac insisting on taking first watch despite Rose's protests that it probably wasn't necessary. "Better safe than sorry," he said, his tone brooking no argument. Rose settled onto her bedroll, watching the stars through gaps in the pine branches overhead. Despite the hard ground beneath her, she felt strangely content. "Isaac," she said softly, "thank you for everything." He looked over at her, his face half illuminated by the firelight. "You don't need to thank me, Rose. Nevertheless, I am grateful, not just for saving me at the river but for—" She hesitated, searching for words, "for showing me kindness when I needed it most." Isaac was quiet for a moment, then said, "You deserve kindness, Rose. More than that, you deserve respect, admiration." He paused, then added more softly, "You're an extraordinary woman." The words hung in the air between them, charged with meaning. Rose felt her heart quicken, unsure how to respond. Before she could find words, Isaac spoke again. "Get some rest. I'll wake you for your watch." Rose closed her eyes, but sleep was long in coming, her mind filled with thoughts of the man sitting watch nearby. The next day dawned clear and warm, promising good travel conditions. They set off early, the trail now leading them through a series of valleys and passes. Isaac seemed more talkative than usual, pointing out interesting plants and geological features, telling stories about his previous travels through these mountains. Rose found herself laughing more than she had in months, drawn out of her usual reserve by his easy companionship. There was something freeing about being here, away from the constraints and judgments of society. By midday, they'd reached a high pass where the trail crested before beginning its descent toward the Durango region. They stopped to rest and take in the view a vast panorama of mountains and valleys stretching to the horizon. "That's Durango country," Isaac said, pointing to a distant valley. "Robert's Ranch is about 15 miles beyond what you can see from here." "It's magnificent," Rose said, genuinely awed by the landscape. They sat side by side on a rocky outcrop, sharing jerky and dried fruit. The sun was warm on their faces despite the high altitude, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. "What will you do?" Rose asked hesitantly. "After you've visited your brother?" Isaac was quiet for a moment, considering. "Not sure," he admitted. "There's another cattle drive starting in a month. I've usually signed on." "Usually," Rose prompted, noting his choice of words. Isaac glanced at her, then back at the distant mountains. "Been thinking lately that maybe it's time for a change." "What kind of change?" Rose asked, her heart beating a little faster. "Might be nice to stay in one place for a while, see the seasons change, plant something and watch it grow." He paused, then added more softly, "Have someone to come home to at night." Rose felt heat rise to her cheeks at the implications behind his words. She looked down at her hands, unsure how to respond. Isaac seemed to sense her discomfort. "We should get moving," he said, rising to his feet. Still a good distance to cover before nightfall. They continued their journey in silence for a time, each lost in their own thoughts. The trail began its descent, winding down from the high pass through stands of aspen and pine. In places, spring wildflowers carpeted open meadows, creating splashes of color against the green. Late in the afternoon, they came upon a small cabin nestled in a grove of aspens. It appeared abandoned, its door hanging loose on leather hinges, but the structure itself was sound. "Trapper's cabin," Isaac explained, "probably only used in winter. Should we stop here for the night?" Rose asked, noting the lengthening shadows. Isaac surveyed the sky, then nodded. "Good idea. Might rain later, judging by those clouds." The cabin was simple but offered welcome shelter, a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough table, and a platform bed frame covered in old pine boughs. Isaac inspected it carefully for signs of animal occupation before declaring it safe. "Better than sleeping outside if it rains," he said, unloading their supplies from Thunder. "I'll check the chimney, make sure it's clear before we light a fire." While Isaac tended to that, Rose swept the dirt floor with a makeshift broom of pine branches and arranged their bedrolls. Outside, dark clouds were indeed gathering, and the wind had picked up, rustling the aspen leaves. By the time Isaac had a fire going in the fireplace, the first raindrops were pattering on the cabin's roof. They prepared a simple dinner, grateful for the shelter as the rain intensified, drumming steadily overhead. "Good timing," Isaac commented, glancing up at the roof. "Would have been a miserable night in the open." Rose nodded, warming her hands by the fire. Despite the rain, the cabin was cozy, the fire casting a warm glow that filled the small space. After their meal, they sat before the fireplace, listening to the rain and the occasional rumble of distant thunder. The enforced proximity of the cabin created an intimacy neither had anticipated. Rose was acutely aware of Isaac beside her, his shoulder occasionally brushing hers as he tended the fire. "Tell me more about your teaching," Isaac said, breaking the comfortable silence. "What do you enjoy most about it?" Rose smiled, touched by his interest. "The moment when a child understands something for the first time. There's a light that comes into their eyes, a sense of wonder and accomplishment. That's what I love most." "You must be a good teacher," Isaac said, his voice warm with admiration. "I try to be," Rose said. "Every child is different. Some learn quickly, others need more time. The trick is finding what works for each one." "Like horses," Isaac observed. "Each has its own temperament, its own way of learning." "Exactly," Rose agreed, pleased by his understanding. "What about you?" "What do you enjoy most about your work?" Isaac considered the question. "The open country, the sky overhead, working with the animals." He paused, then added, "But lately the trail's been feeling longer, the nights colder." His eyes met hers in the firelight. "Maybe I'm getting old." "Hardly," Rose said, a smile tugging at her lips. "How old are you, if you don't mind my asking?" 32 this past winter," Isaac replied. "You?" 27, Rose said. "Sometimes I feel older after everything that's happened. War aged us all," Isaac said quietly. "Even those who didn't fight." Rose nodded, thinking of the young man she'd lost at Antietam, of the hardships that had followed the conflict. "It changed everything." "Not everything," Isaac said, his eyes holding hers. "Some things remain constant, things worth holding on to." "Like what?" Rose asked softly. "Honor, decency, caring for others." He paused, then added more softly, "The capacity to begin again, to find happiness even after loss." The depth of feeling in his words touched Rose deeply. In that moment, with the rain falling softly outside and the fire crackling between them, she felt a connection to this man that transcended their brief acquaintance. "Isaac," she began, not sure what she wanted to say but needing to speak. Before she could continue, a particularly loud crack of thunder shook the cabin, causing them both to start. Isaac chuckled, breaking the tension of the moment. "Storm's moving closer," he observed, rising to check that Thunder was securely sheltered in the lean-to beside the cabin. When he returned, his hair and shoulders damp from the brief exposure to the rain, Rose had spread their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire. "You should take the bed frame," Isaac said, nodding toward the pine platform. "It's barely wide enough for one," Rose pointed out. "And besides, the ground near the fire is warmer." Isaac didn't argue, settling onto his bedroll with a sigh of weariness. Rose lay down on her own blankets, the fire between them casting flickering shadows on the cabin walls. "Good night, Isaac," she said softly. "Good night, Rose," he replied, his voice equally gentle. Despite her physical tiredness, sleep eluded Rose. She lay awake, listening to the rain and occasional thunder, aware of Isaac's presence across the fire. His breathing had deepened, suggesting he'd fallen asleep, and Rose found herself studying his face in the firelight, the strong lines of his jaw, the slight furrow between his brows even in sleep, the way his lashes rested against his cheeks. What was happening to her? In less than a week, this man had gone from stranger to what? Friend, certainly, but the flutter in her heart when he looked at her, the warmth that spread through her at his touch, those feelings went beyond friendship. "It's too soon," she whispered to herself, turning away from the sight of him. And yet, hadn't life taught her that time was precious? That happiness should be grasped when found. With these thoughts circling in her mind, Rose eventually drifted into a restless sleep, her dreams filled with rushing waters and a strong hand pulling her to safety. She woke to early morning light filtering through the cabin's small window. The rain had stopped and birds were singing outside. Isaac was already up, kindling the fire back to life. "Morning," he said when he noticed her stirring. "Sleep well." "Well enough," Rose replied, sitting up and smoothing her hair. "The storm, passed in the night, left everything fresh and clean." He gestured toward the door. "Should be good traveling today." They broke their fast with the last of the cornbread and some dried apples, then packed their belongings and prepared to leave. Before departing, Isaac carefully extinguished the fire and closed the cabin door as best he could. "Leaving it better than we found it," he explained. "Next traveler might need the shelter as much as we did." The consideration in this simple act was so typical of him, Rose thought, always thinking of others, even strangers he would never meet. The trail was indeed pleasant after the rain, the air clear and fresh, the vegetation vibrant with moisture, wildflowers seeming to have bloomed overnight. They made good progress through the morning, descending steadily toward the lower elevations where Durango lay. By midday, the character of the land had changed. The rugged peaks gave way to gentler foothills, and the trail widened enough for Rose and Isaac to walk side by side, thunder following contentedly behind them. "We'll reach the valley by nightfall," Isaac said, pointing toward the more open country ahead. "Could push on to Robert's place, but it'd be dark. Better to camp one more night, arrive fresh in the morning." Rose nodded, feeling a curious mix of anticipation and nervousness at the thought of meeting Isaac's family. Would they welcome her? Would they wonder about her relationship with Isaac? What exactly was her relationship with Isaac? The question preoccupied her as they continued their journey through the afternoon. They were comfortable together, that much was certain. There was respect between them, friendship, and at least on her part something deeper growing. But Isaac had made no declaration, offered no promises beyond ensuring her safe arrival in Durango. "Penny for your thoughts," Isaac said, breaking into her reverie. Rose smiled, a little embarrassed to be caught wool-gathering. "Just wondering what your family will think of my sudden appearance." "They'll be glad to meet you," Isaac assured her. "Robert's always saying I should find someone to settle down with." He paused, then added with a slight flush, "Not that I'm suggesting that is, I wouldn't presume, I understand," Rose said quickly, her own cheeks warming. "You're simply being kind." "No," Isaac said firmly, "it's not just kindness, Rose." The directness of his gaze made her breath catch. "What is it then?" she asked softly. Isaac stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "I've been on the trail a long time, met all kinds of people. But never someone like you. Someone who makes me think about tomorrow instead of just getting through today. Rose's heart pounded in her chest. Isaac, I'm not good with words, he continued, his voice roughened with emotion. But these past days with you, they've meant something to me. You've meant something. Rose couldn't look away from the sincerity in his eyes. You've meant something to me too, she admitted quietly. For a long moment, they stood there on the trail, the world around them fading as something unspoken yet powerful flowed between them. Then Isaac took a step closer, his hand rising hesitantly to touch her cheek. Rose, he murmured, her name a question and an answer all at once. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly at the tenderness of it. When she opened them again, Isaac's face was closer, his expression a mix of hope and uncertainty. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head until his lips brushed hers, a question asked in the gentlest possible way. Rose answered by stepping closer, her hand coming to rest on his chest as she returned the kiss. It was sweet and brief, a first exploration rather than a claiming. When they parted, Isaac's eyes searched hers as if making sure he hadn't overstepped. The smile that bloomed on Rose's face seemed to reassure him. He smiled back, his hand still cradling her cheek. Been wanting to do that since Bear Creek Station, he admitted, a touch of shyness in his voice that Rose found utterly endearing. I'm glad you waited until now, she said. It means more, somehow. Isaac nodded, understanding. He stepped back reluctantly, his hand dropping from her face. We should keep moving, he said, though his eyes suggested he'd rather stay right where they were. They continued down the trail, walking closer now, their hands occasionally brushing. There was a new awareness between them, a shared secret that brightened even the most mundane aspects of their journey. By late afternoon, they reached the valley proper, the trail now passing through meadows dotted with wildflowers and occasional stands of cottonwood trees. The land was opening up, becoming more hospitable, and in the distance, Rose could make out what appeared to be fenced field signs of settlement. That's the edge of Harmon's land, Isaac explained, pointing to the distant fences. Robert's place is beyond, closer to the foothills. They made camp that night in a grove of cottonwoods near a gently flowing stream. The evening was mild, the stars brilliant overhead. After their meal, they sat side by side, shoulders touching, enjoying the peaceful sounds of the night. What will happen tomorrow? Rose asked softly, voicing the question that had been on her mind throughout the day. Isaac turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful. We'll go to Robert's, get you settled. Then, if you're willing, I can take you into Durango, introduce you to the town council. They're the ones organizing the school, and after that, Rose pressed gently. Isaac reached for her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. That depends on what you want, Rose. What if I want to stay, not just for the teaching position, but… She hesitated, gathering her courage. For you. The hope that blazed in Isaac's eyes at her words was answer enough, but he spoke anyway, his voice rough with emotion. Then I'd be the happiest man in the territory, but I won't hold you to anything said on the trail. You should see Durango first, meet people, make sure it's where you want to be. Rose appreciated his consideration, his unwillingness to rush her decision. It was, she realized, entirely in character for him, always putting her needs before his own. Fair enough, she agreed. But Isaac, you should know I've never felt this way before, not even. She paused, thinking of her long-ago love, not even with James. Isaac's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. I'm honored, he said simply, and I feel the same. They sat together in companionable silence as the fire burned low, the future stretching before them, uncertain in its details, but promising in its potential. Morning brought a sense of anticipation as they packed up their camp for the last time. The final leg of their journey took them through increasingly cultivated land, fenced pastures where cattle grazed, fields being prepared for planting, occasional farmhouses in the distance. Around mid-morning, they crested a gentle rise and saw a ranch spread out below them, a substantial log house with a wide porch, several outbuildings, corrals, and pastures where horses grazed. Robert's place, Isaac said, a note of pride in his voice. Built most of it himself. As they approached, a man emerged from the barn tall like Isaac but broader, with the same dark hair streaked with a bit more gray. He shaded his eyes against the sun, then his face broke into a wide grin. "Isaac," he called, striding toward them. "You're a sight for sore eyes, brother." The two men embraced heartily, slapping each other on the back. Then Robert stepped back, his curious gaze falling on Rose. "And who might this be?" he asked, his tone friendly but puzzled. "Robert, this is Miss Rose O'Malley," Isaac said formally. "Rose, my brother Robert Whitman." "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Whitman," Rose said, suddenly aware of how she must look after days on the trail. "Likewise, Miss O'Malley," Robert replied, tipping his hat politely. "And it's just Robert, please." He glanced at Isaac, a question in his eyes. "Rose is heading to Durango," Isaac explained. "Looking to take up a teaching position. We met on the trail she was attempting to cross the Cimarron during the flood." "Good Lord," Robert said, looking at Rose with new respect. "That river's taken many a life." "It nearly took mine," Rose admitted, "if Isaac hadn't been there." "He pulled you out," Robert guessed, a knowing look crossing his face as he glanced between them. "Dove right in after me," Rose confirmed, her voice softening at the memory. Robert's expression warmed. "That sounds like my brother. Always was one to jump in head first when someone needed help." He gestured toward the house. "Come on in. Margaret will be thrilled to have company, especially another woman." As they approached the house, a slender woman with honey-brown hair pulled back in a neat bun appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Her face lit up at the sight of Isaac. "Look what the wind blew in," she called cheerfully. "We weren't expecting you for another week at least." She hurried down the steps to embrace her brother-in-law, then turned questioning eyes to Rose. "Margaret, this is Miss Rose O'Malley," Robert said. "Isaac rescued her from the Cimarron and escorted her safely through the mountains." Margaret's eyes widened, then a knowing smile touched her lips. "Did he now?" she said, looking between Isaac and Rose with obvious interest. "Well, Miss O'Malley, you are most welcome to our home. Please call me Rose," she said, immediately warming to Margaret's friendly manner. "Rose it is, then, and I'm Margaret." She took Rose's arm. "You must be exhausted after your journey. Come inside and rest. I'll heat water for a bath, and you can borrow some of my clothes until we can wash yours." The offer of a bath was too tempting to resist, and Rose allowed herself to be led into the house, glancing back once to see Isaac and Robert deep in conversation, their heads bent close together. The interior of the Whitman home was simply but comfortably furnished, with handcrafted wooden furniture, colorful woven rugs, and shelves lined with books, a surprising luxury on the frontier. Margaret showed Rose to a small bedroom off the main living area. "This is our guest room," she explained. "It's yours for as long as you need it." "You're very kind," Rose said, touched by the welcome. "I don't want to impose nonsense," Margaret interrupted gently. "Any friend of Isaac's is welcome here." She paused, then added with a slight twinkle in her eye, "And I suspect you might be more than just a friend." Rose felt heat rise to her cheeks. "We've only known each other a short time," she demurred. Margaret smiled understandingly. "Sometimes a short time is all it takes," she said. "I knew Robert was the one the first day we met." She patted Rose's hand. "Rest now. I'll bring water for your bath, and then you can tell me all about your adventures with my brother-in-law." Left alone, Rose sat on the edge of the bed, a real bed with a proper mattress and clean linens, and tried to absorb the sudden change in her circumstances. A week ago, she'd been a lone woman on the trail, uncertain of her future. Now she was a guest in a warm home with the promise of a teaching position ahead and the beginnings of what? A romance. A future with a man who had quite literally saved her life. The thought both thrilled and frightened her. It seemed too good to be true, too much like the happy endings in storybooks rather than real life. Her contemplation was interrupted by the return of Margaret, accompanied by two young children, a boy of about 7 and a girl perhaps 5 years old. Rose, these are our children, David and Emily, Margaret introduced them. Children, this is Miss O'Malley, a friend of your Uncle Isaac's. Did you really almost drown? David asked with typical boyish directness. Pa says Uncle Isaac jumped in the river to save you, David. Margaret scolded, but Rose laughed. Yes, he did, she told the boy. The river was very high from the spring melt, and I foolishly tried to cross it in the dark. Were you scared? Emily asked, her eyes wide. Terrified, Rose admitted, but your uncle is very brave. He's the best, David declared loyally. He taught me to ride and throw a lasso. And he brings me pretty rocks from the mountains, Emily added, not to be outdone. That sounds like him, Rose said, smiling at the children's obvious adoration of their uncle. All right, you two, that's enough questions for now, Margaret said firmly. Miss O'Malley needs to rest. You can talk to her more at supper. The children reluctantly departed, and Margaret began bringing in buckets of hot water for the bath. Soon, Rose was luxuriating in the first real bath she'd had in weeks, the warm water soothing her travel-worn body. After bathing, she dressed in the clothes Margaret had lent her, a simple blue calico dress that was a bit loose but clean and comfortable. When she emerged from the bedroom, her hair neatly braided, she found the family gathered in the main room. Isaac was seated on the floor, helping Emily with what appeared to be a small wooden puzzle, while Robert and David worked on repairing a bridle at the table. Isaac looked up as she entered, his eyes warming at the sight of her. Feel better? He asked. Immensely, Rose replied with a smile. Your family has been very kind. We're happy to have you, Margaret said, entering from the kitchen area with a pot of coffee. It's not often we get visitors, especially female ones. The afternoon passed pleasantly, with Rose gradually relaxing into the family's easy dynamic. Isaac clearly adored his niece and nephew, engaging them with patience and genuine interest. Rose found herself watching him with the children, imagining what kind of father he might be. The thought brought a blush to her cheeks, and when she glanced up, she found Margaret observing her with a knowing smile. Dinner was a hearty affair: roast chicken, potatoes, fresh baked bread, and a berry pie that Margaret proudly announced had been made with the last of the previous summer's preserves. The conversation flowed easily, Robert and Isaac exchanging news and stories, while the children interjected with questions and observations of their own. Rose contributed when asked, but was content mostly to observe, savoring the warmth of family life that she'd been without for so long. After the meal, when the children had been put to bed despite their protests, the adults gathered on the porch to enjoy the cool evening air. Robert produced a bottle of whiskey, pouring small measures for himself and Isaac, while Margaret brought out cups of coffee for herself and Rose. So Rose, Robert said, leaning back in his chair, Isaac tells me you're interested in the teaching position in Durango. Yes, Rose confirmed. I was a teacher in Kansas City for several years. The town's been trying to establish a proper school for months, Robert said. Up until now, schooling's been haphazard, parents teaching their own children or paying whoever has some education to tutor them. But with more families settling here, they need something more organized. Do you know when they plan to start the school? Rose asked. They're hoping to have it running by late summer, Margaret said. They've already secured a building, the old mercantile, that moved to larger premises. It needs some work, but it has good light and plenty of room. It sounds promising, Rose said, genuine interest kindling at the prospect. I can take you into town tomorrow, Isaac offered. Introduce you to some of the council members. That would be wonderful, Rose said gratefully. As the evening wore on, Robert and Margaret tactfully excused themselves, leaving Rose and Isaac alone on the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Your family is lovely, Rose said softly after a comfortable silence. They are, Isaac agreed. Robert's always been the steady one, knew exactly what he wanted and went after it. He glanced at Rose, his expression thoughtful in the dim light. I've been the wanderer, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. And now, Rose asked, her heart beating a little faster. Isaac reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. Now I'm thinking roots might not be such a bad thing if they're planted in the right soil. The metaphor wasn't lost on Rose. She turned her hand in his, their fingers intertwining naturally. I've been running for so long, she admitted. First from grief, then from unwanted attention. I never thought I'd find a place where I might want to stay. And have you? Isaac asked, his voice low and hopeful. Rose looked up at him, at the face that had become so dear to her in such a short time. I think I might have, she said softly, though it's not so much the place as the people. Isaac's smile was like the sunrise, gradual but illuminating. He raised their joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her fingers. I'm glad to hear it, he said simply. They sat together in the starlight, talking softly of small things and large, their childhoods, their dreams, the events that had shaped them. It was as if, having acknowledged the feelings growing between them, they were eager to fill in all the spaces to know each other completely. When the night air grew too chill to ignore, they reluctantly parted. Rose to the guest room, Isaac to the bunkhouse where he would sleep alongside the ranch hands. Morning brought a flurry of activity as the household prepared for the trip to town. Robert needed supplies, so he would drive the wagon with Margaret and the children, while Isaac would ride Thunder, with Rose either riding double or in the wagon, depending on her preference. I'd like to ride with you, she told Isaac quietly as they stood in the yard. If Thunder can manage both of us. He's carried heavier loads, Isaac assured her, a pleased smile lighting his face. So it was that they set out for Durango, Rose seated in front of Isaac on Thunder's back, his arms around her to hold the reins. The position was intimate, her back against his chest, his breath warm against her hair. The wagon followed at a more sedate pace, Robert calling out that they'd catch up in town. The ride was peaceful, the land opening into a broad valley with the town visible in the distance. As they approached, Rose could make out a collection of buildings, some wooden, others of stone or brick arranged along a main street, with smaller lanes branching off. It wasn't large by Eastern standards, but it had an air of permanence and purpose that many frontier towns lacked. What do you think? Isaac asked as they drew closer. It looks established, Rose said, searching for the right word, like a real community, not just a stopover. It is, Isaac confirmed. Started as a mining supply town, but it's growing into something more. There's talk of the railroad coming through next year. They rode down the main street, passing a general store, a bank, a hotel, and various other businesses. People nodded in greeting to Isaac, curious glances cast Rose's way but not unkindly. They stopped in front of the town's sole restaurant, a whitewashed building with a sign proclaiming it the Pioneer Cafe. Thought we might get something to eat while waiting for Robert and Margaret, Isaac suggested, helping Rose dismount. The owner, Mrs. Peterson, is on the town council. She's been one of the main advocates for the school. Inside, the cafe was clean and welcoming, with checkered tablecloths and the aroma of fresh baked bread and coffee. A stout woman with gray streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun looked up from behind the counter, her face breaking into a wide smile at the sight of Isaac. Isaac Whitman. Didn't expect to see you back so soon. Robert said you were on a cattle drive. Finished early, Mrs. Peterson, Isaac replied, touching his hat respectfully. Mrs. Peterson, I'd like to introduce Miss Rose O'Malley. Rose, this is Martha Peterson, finest cook in the territory and member of the town council. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Peterson, Rose said politely. Mrs. Peterson's shrewd eyes took in Rose's appearance, then darted to Isaac with obvious interest. Likewise, Miss O'Malley, what brings you to our little town? Rose is a qualified teacher, Isaac explained before Rose could answer. Taught in Kansas City for several years. She's interested in the position here. Mrs. Peterson's face lit up. A real teacher, with experience? Well, now that is good news. We've been hoping for someone with proper training. She gestured to a table by the window. Sit down, both of you. Breakfast is on the house, and you can tell me all about your experience, Miss O'Malley. Over eggs, bacon, and the best biscuits Rose had tasted in years, she found herself essentially interviewing for the position. Mrs. Peterson was direct but fair in her questions, asking about Rose's training, her teaching methods, and her experience with children of different ages and backgrounds. "We've got a mixed group here," Mrs. Peterson explained. "Some kids have had some schooling, others none at all. Ages from 6 to 15 or so. Parents want them learning the basics: reading, writing, arithmetic, but also history, geography, maybe some science if you're up to it." "That sounds similar to my experience in Kansas City," Rose said. "I had students from very diverse backgrounds there with varying levels of previous education." Mrs. Peterson nodded approvingly. "And what about discipline? Some of our older boys can be a handful." "Firm but fair," Rose replied without hesitation. "I believe in setting clear expectations and consequences, but also in rewarding effort and improvement." The interview continued as they ate, with Isaac mostly silent but clearly proud of Rose's confident, articulate responses. By the time Robert, Margaret, and the children arrived, Mrs. Peterson was thoroughly impressed. "I'd say you're exactly what we've been looking for, Miss O'Malley," she declared. "Of course, the rest of the council will need to meet you, but you have my full support." She glanced at Isaac with a knowing smile. "And I suspect you'll have plenty of local support as well." Rose felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The teaching position had been her reason for coming to Durango, her practical justification. To know that it was a real possibility, not just a vague hope, was deeply reassuring. After breakfast, Isaac took Rose to see the building that would become the school. It was indeed the former mercantile, a sturdy structure with large windows and a central location just off the main street. Inside, it was dusty and in need of repairs, but Rose could see its potential. The high ceilings would provide good ventilation, the large windows ample light, and there was plenty of space for desks, a teaching area, and perhaps even a small library. "What do you think?" Isaac asked, watching her expression as she surveyed the room. "It's perfect," Rose said honestly. "It needs work, but the bones are good. With some cleaning, repairs, and proper furnishings, it could be an excellent schoolhouse." The pride in Isaac's eyes as he looked at her made Rose's heart swell. Here was a man who valued her mind, her skills, her independence, not just her appearance or what she could do for him. It was a refreshing change from her experiences in Kansas City. The rest of the day was spent meeting other council members, all of whom seemed as impressed with Rose as Mrs. Peterson had been. By late afternoon, she had been unofficially offered the position, with a formal vote to follow at the next council meeting in a week's time. "They'll provide housing as part of your compensation," Isaac explained as they walked back toward the cafe, where they'd arranged to meet Robert and Margaret. "There's a small cottage behind the schoolhouse that's traditionally been used for the teacher." "My own home," Rose mused, the idea both appealing and slightly daunting after years of boarding houses and rented rooms. "It seems almost too good to be true." "You've earned it," Isaac said firmly. "These people are lucky to have someone with your experience and dedication." His unwavering support touched Rose deeply. As they walked, she impulsively reached for his hand, their fingers entwining naturally. Isaac looked surprised but pleased, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. They reached the cafe to find Robert, Margaret, and the children already waiting, the wagon loaded with their purchases. "Well," Margaret asked eagerly. "How did it go?" "Wonderfully," Rose replied, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. "Everyone's been so welcoming, and the school building has such potential. They've all but offered me the position officially." "That's wonderful news," Margaret exclaimed, embracing Rose warmly. Robert clapped Isaac on the shoulder, a knowing look passing between the brothers. "Seems like things are working out all around," he commented. The journey back to the ranch was filled with animated conversation, Rose describing the school building in detail, while the children peppered her with questions about what they would learn when classes began. "Will you teach us, Miss O'Malley?" Emily asked hopefully. Rose glanced at Isaac, riding alongside the wagon, then back at the little girl. "Yes, I believe I will," she said softly. That evening, after another hearty meal and when the children had been put to bed, Isaac asked Rose if she'd like to take a walk. The night was clear and mild, the moon nearly full, casting silver light over the ranch. They strolled toward a small rise not far from the house, where a bench had been placed to take advantage of the view. Seated side by side, they gazed out over the peaceful landscape. "Happy?" Isaac asked after a comfortable silence. "Very," Rose replied truthfully. "It's all happened so quickly, but somehow it feels right." "Sometimes the right things do happen quickly," Isaac said, turning slightly to face her. "Rose, I know we haven't known each other long, but these past days, they've meant everything to me." Rose's heart quickened at the intensity in his voice. "They've meant everything to me too," she said softly. Isaac took her hands in his expression serious in the moonlight. "I'm not a wealthy man, I don't have fancy possessions or a grand house. But I do have a piece of land not far from here, land I've been holding onto for years, thinking someday I might build something there." He paused, then continued, his voice roughened with emotion. "I'd like to build something now, a home, a life, with you if you'll have me." Rose felt tears spring to her eyes at the simple, heartfelt proposal. "Isaac," she whispered, "are you asking what I think you're asking?" "I'm asking if you'll marry me," he said plainly. "I know it's sudden, I know we're still getting to know each other. But I also know that I love you, Rose O'Malley. I think I've loved you since I saw you standing by that river, so determined to forge your own path." The declaration, so honest and unadorned, touched Rose deeply. "I love you too," she said, the words coming easily, naturally. "And yes, I'll marry you." The joy that transformed Isaac's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle, and kissed her a kiss that promised a lifetime of love, respect, and partnership. When they returned to the house hand in hand, Robert and Margaret were waiting on the porch. One look at their faces told the story. "She said yes?" Robert asked, though the answer was obvious. Isaac nodded, his smile wider than Rose had ever seen it. "She did." There were congratulations, embraces, and a toast with the last of Robert's whiskey. Plans were discussed. The wedding would be small and soon, perhaps in June after the school was ready and before the fall term began. Isaac would start building their home on his land with Robert's help. In the meantime, Rose would stay with Robert and Margaret, preparing for both the school and the wedding. That night, as Rose lay in the guest room bed, she marveled at the turn her life had taken. A week ago, she had been a woman alone, fleeing from an unwanted suitor, uncertain of her future. Now she was a bride-to-be, a soon-to-be teacher, part of a community and a family. All because she had tried to cross a river in the dark and a cowboy had said, "Hold on," and dove into the water. The weeks that followed were busy ones. Rose divided her time between helping Margaret with household tasks, working on preparations for the school, and getting to know the community of Durango. The town council officially offered her the position, and work began on refurbishing the schoolhouse and the small cottage behind it. Isaac split his time between helping with the school renovations and beginning work on their future home. The land he owned was beautiful, a gentle slope overlooking a small creek, with mountains visible in the distance. The foundation was laid and walls began to rise, a tangible symbol of their future together. In quiet evenings, they would sit together on Robert and Margaret's porch, planning their life, sharing their dreams, deepening their understanding of each other. With each conversation, each shared smile, each gentle touch, Rose's certainty grew. This was right. This was where she belonged, with this man who had literally and figuratively saved her. The wedding was held on a perfect June day, with wildflowers in bloom and the mountains standing witness in the distance. The ceremony took place on Isaac's land, their land now, with the partially built house as a backdrop. It was simple but meaningful, with Robert standing as Isaac's best man and Margaret as Rose's matron of honor. The children scattered flower petals, and the entire community turned out to celebrate, bringing food, gifts, and warm wishes for the couple. Rose wore a dress of pale blue silk that Margaret had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Isaac, clean-shaven and in a new suit, looked at her as if she were the most precious thing he'd ever seen. "I do," she said clearly when the time came, her heart full to bursting with love for this man who had changed her life. "I do," Isaac echoed, his voice steady and sure. When they were pronounced husband and wife, and Isaac bent to kiss his bride, the cheers of their friends and neighbors filled the air, a joyful sound in a land that had seen its share of hardship. The celebration continued well into the evening, with music, dancing, and more food than Rose had ever seen in one place. As the sun began to set, casting golden light over the gathering, Isaac pulled her aside for a moment of quiet. "Happy?" he asked, just as he had on the night he'd proposed. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Rose replied truthfully, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. Their first home as a married couple was the teacher's cottage behind the schoolhouse, which had been lovingly renovated by the community. It was small but comfortable, with a bedroom, a living area with a stone fireplace, and a kitchen. It would serve them well while their permanent home was being completed. School began in September, with 27 students ranging in age from 6 to 15. Rose found herself challenged but fulfilled by the work, adapting her teaching to meet the diverse needs of her pupils. Isaac continued his work on their home, while also taking occasional jobs as a horse trainer on nearby ranches. Their evenings were their own time to share the day's events, to read together by the fire, to learn the intricate dance of marriage. Rose discovered the joy of falling asleep in her husband's arms and waking to his smile. Isaac found delight in simple domestic moments, Rose humming as she prepared dinner, the scent of her hair when he kissed her good morning, the sound of her laughter at his stories. By Christmas, their house was complete enough to move in, though finishing touches would continue through the winter. They celebrated the holiday there, hosting Robert, Margaret, and the children, as well as several friends from town who had no family nearby. The house was filled with warmth, laughter, and the rich aromas of Margaret's cooking, supplemented by Rose's own developing culinary skills. As they lay in bed that night in their own home at last, Rose nestled against Isaac's side, his arm around her shoulders. "I have something for you," she said softly. "One last Christmas gift." "You've already given me more than enough," Isaac protested gently. Rose smiled in the darkness. "This one couldn't be wrapped and put under the tree." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby, Isaac, in summer." The wonder that filled his face in the dim firelight was something Rose knew she would remember all her days. "A baby," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "We're going to be parents," Rose nodded, her own eyes filling with happy tears. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday." Isaac gathered her close, his kiss expressing what words could not: gratitude, joy, love beyond measure. When he finally pulled back, there were tears in his eyes too. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" Rose asked, puzzled by his gratitude. "For trying to cross that river," Isaac said, a smile breaking through his emotion. "For needing me to dive in after you. For being brave enough to trust a stranger on the trail. For loving me." Rose touched his face gently, tracing the beloved features that had become her home as surely as the house around them. "Thank you for being there," she whispered. "For saying hold on when I was lost in the current. For showing me what real love looks like." They held each other in the firelit darkness, the future stretching before them like the western horizon, vast, promising, and full of possibility. In July of 1876, as the nation celebrated its centennial, Rose gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Rose's mother. She had Isaac's dark hair and Rose's determined spirit, evident from her first lusty cry. 2 years later, a son joined the family, James Robert, named for Rose's first love and Isaac's steadfast brother. The years passed, marked by the changing seasons, the growth of their children, the deepening of their love. The school flourished under Rose's guidance, eventually moving to a larger building as Durango grew. Isaac's skill with horses brought him respect and steady work throughout the territory, while still allowing him ample time with his family. There were challenges, of course, harsh winters, occasional illness, the natural difficulties of raising children and maintaining a marriage. But through it all, Rose and Isaac faced life as they had begun together, supporting each other, finding joy in simple moments and strength in shared burdens. On the 10th anniversary of their meeting, Isaac took Rose back to the Cimarron River. It was summer, and the water flowed gently now, nothing like the raging torrent it had been that fateful night. Their children played nearby, supervised by Robert and Margaret, while Isaac led Rose to the approximate spot where they had first met. "I sometimes wonder," he said, looking out over the peaceful water, "what would have happened if I'd been camped a mile further on or if you'd tried to cross an hour earlier." "I think we would have found each other somehow," Rose said, her hand in his. "Some things are meant to be." Isaac smiled, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepened by years of outdoor work and genuine happiness. "You know what I think," he said, turning to face her fully. "I think that river gave me the greatest gift of my life. It brought me you." Rose stood on tiptoe to kiss him, this man who had been her rescuer, her friend, her lover, her husband, the father of her children. In his arms she had found her home, her purpose, her joy. "And it brought me you," she whispered against his lips. "My cowboy who said hold on and dove into the water."